Good morning, everyone, and welcome. It is great to see so many of you joining us today for this European-focused webinar on the evolving landscape of climate impact in building legislation across Europe. We have a very nice lineup for you today, and as Europe moves forward towards zero-emission buildings, the focus is shifting quite a lot from what we have seen, this operate of buildings and way more on the emitting across the entire life cycle, so the more embodied carbon. With the revised energy performance of the building directive, the EPBD, the next few years with new requirements, where new requirements are introduced, will be very crucial for aligning the whole design, policy, and practice within in our industry. Just a practical thing, questions can be asked in the chat, and we will of course do our best to answer them either in the QA session in the end, or we can also answer those questions in the chat. But for today's session, we will try to guide you through what's changing, why it matters, and how to prepare for the new legislation. We'll begin with an overview from the European Commission, where Bunthan will take us through the upcoming EU-wide requirements and their implications in the sector. Then we will hear from the Nordic region, where Hela is joining us, where several countries are already applying life cycle assessments, whole carbon life cycle assessments in the national regulations. And she is offering a lot of valuable lessons that are learned in these countries. And then finally, we will see how it works in practice with a live demonstration from Dorte Mandrup Architects, where Jakob is representing them, and real-time LCA, where we are showing data, workflows, design decisions, how everything comes together to understand, reduce, and document a building's climate impact. We got a very nice, interesting lineup, so thank you all for being here. Let's dive into it and give a warm welcome to Bunthan, Policy Officer in the EU Commission. So please, Bunthan, the floor is yours, and you are welcome to share your screen.
Thank you so much, Matt. I don't know if everybody can see my screen.
Yeah, we see it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Bunthan IEA. I'm a policy officer working at the DG Energy, and I'm working on this particular topics of life cycle assessments of global warming potential of new buildings under the directive EPBD, so Energy Performance of Building Directive. Just a quick couple of why we need to why we have EPBD and why we need to tackle these issues of life cycle assessment. So buildings is a sector that consume a lot of energy. According to the numbers, is 40% of the EU buildings is responsible for the energy use, and a third of energy-related greenhouse gas emissions are caused by buildings. But as you can see, we were not going to tackle only the energy related, but also the whole of the buildings, whole life cycle of the buildings. Anyhow, since the beginnings, the idea of this directive energy performance of buildings, since the beginnings, the main focus of this directive is on the energy side, as the name suggested, and it has a long history of implementations, revisions, and the latest one, as you can see in this slide, is the 2024 versions we call the EPBD recast. And one of the change, or the main change, I might say, is the additions of these new aspects of life cycle global warming potential calculations. This is a quick timeline of the dates related to this EPBD recast. for the purpose of today's presentations, I invite you to focus only on the upper side of this graph. It is adopted, proposed by the Commissions in 2021. It has adopted and published in the official journals in May last year, and it has been entered into force right now. The Commission has since then draft a couple of documents supporting package for the implementations of this directive. The supporting package has been published June 2025, so just before the summer, and the member states as the national authority has the obligations to transpose this directive by May 2026. So next year.
Bunthan,
yes.
Sorry for interrupting you. We are still seeing the first slide. Actually,
that is strange because in my computer I move the slide. Let me do it again then.
Of course.
Can you see my screen with the right slide?
Yes.
Perfect. So just move back a little bit what I've mentioned earlier. So 40% of the EU buildings are responsible for energy use, and a third of energy-related emissions gas are caused by buildings. And the EPBD recast, I mean, is a step that is let's follow the long history of the recast and the revisions of EPBD with the latest editions of life cycle global warming potential calculation. And the deadlines that I have just mentioned, proposal adopted by the Commissions, the publications last year, the supporting package that is published just before the summer, and the obligations of the member states to transpose this directive by May next year. And so what is the life cycle global warming potential calculations? One of the recital that we have in this directive give the reasons or the motivation why we should take all these issues. They consider that buildings are responsible for the greenhouse gas emission before, during, and after its operational lifetime. So not only the emission related to the energy use, but also the productions of the materials and products, the constructions of the buildings, and of course, at the end of life as well. So the directive considered that this whole life emissions of the buildings should be taken into account. And the most logical part is to start with the new buildings. The idea is to encourage the optimal design of buildings and optimal choice of material to reduce as much as possible these life cycle emissions. One of the slides that I forgot to include in this presentation is, of course, to show you how much the emissions that is related to the buildings, especially the new buildings, because as I mentioned earlier, the big chunk of the emissions that we have right now in the building sector, of course, are still the energy use of the buildings. However, if you look at the emissions of the whole life cycle, the new buildings, even though it is still a very small part compared to the large building stock, is a very significant. It's basically the second biggest emissions of the greenhouse emissions in the building sector after the operational part, and that's why we should take hold this issue with the new buildings. And there's two main provisions that we have regarding this life cycle global warming potential calculations in the directive. One is the obligation to do the calculations from 2028 for large new buildings and from 2030 for all buildings. That is enshrined in Articles 1.2, and we have also in Articles 1.5 requirements for the member states to publish by 2027 the national roadmap detailing how they're going to introduce the limits value for these life cycle assessments of new buildings. And for the calculations of this life cycle global warming potentials, the commissions are required to adopt a delegated act to set out how the harmonized framework should be, but before the end of the years. Here is a quick timeline of the provisions that is related to the life cycle global warming potential. We have the adoptions of the EPBD in 2024. We have before the end of this year the adoptions of the delegated act related to the framework or the methodology, I might say, for the calculations. By 2027 January, the member states has to publish and notify their national roadmaps and telling how they're going to introduce the limits value. By January 2028, the calculation is mandatory for buildings, for large buildings, so over 1,000 meters square. And from 2030, the calculation is mandatory for all buildings, and the limits value that the member states foresee in their national roadmaps has to be in place by that time. So a quick word on the calculations. So the first layer, the first components of this provisions. We have in Article 7.2, as I just mentioned, the obligation to do the calculation for large building and all buildings from 2028 and 2030 respectively. And we have the obligation for the commissions to adopt this delegated act. And the idea is to amend the current Annex 3 that we have in the EPBD to set out this harmonized framework for the national calculation. And the Annex 3 that we have right now already mentioned all those quite succinct, I might say, quite brief, quite short, give already a couple of indications or directions as where we should go. There's a lot of clear indications of that it should be the total life cycle global warming potential that is to be calculated. It has to be calculated for each life cycle stage. It has to be calculated, expressed as a kilo CO2 per meter square. There's mentions of the study period for 50 years. Also, the scope of buildings elements and technical elements to be included in the calculations. Has to follow levels EU common framework for the indicator 1.2 for those who are familiar with levels. And then the data regarding the construction products to be used for the calculations has to be consistent or aligned with the construction product regulation. So the EU 305 2011 regulation. And what you're going to find in this delegated act that we are working at now at the commissions is more or less in the same spirit, I might say. So one thing that I can tell you is the calculation itself has to be how to say, it's one of the biggest considerations as we have or reflections that we have when drafting this act is to understand and to acknowledge that some member states already have their regulation in place. Helle, who has also who will present the initiative in the Nordic country, come after me, will present to you what they have already done. And the thing that we are doing here at the Commission's level right now is not to say we acknowledge the fact that this initiative has already been in place. So when we aim to have as much as possible the harmonized, we have to acknowledge that the existing national framework, existing private initiative, and also acknowledge the fact that some member states are still very new to this kind of regulation. So we have to find a balance between harmonized and flexibility for the member states. And also the main things that we have in mind, the main objective that we have to mind is at the end of the day, is the results are comparable or not across the union. That is the main objective that we want to achieve. In these delegated regulations, as you're going to find, is the tram or the plan is going to follow what is the number of things that is already set out already in the Annex 3 with more clarification, I might say. So general consideration, for example, which standards to be used for the calculations, the scope of life cycle stage, when you say all, what are the mandatory one, I might say, for the calculation, the scope of building components. When we're talking about levels, of course, level still have certain levels of granularity, and we try at least to give more clarifications on that. The reference studies period, I think we're not going to innovate anything new beside what is already mentioned in the Annex 3. Data to be used for the calculations, of course, beside the data that is available or will be available under the CPR, what kind of other data to be used, the definitions of what useful floor area, and how data to be reported when the calculation is finished is also mentioned in this delegated act. One thing that I want to share to you today is the news that we just have published a public consultation, for feedback. The have your says just the last week's on Friday, and we are happy to receive your thought and your view on this delegated draft. It's the first time that, I mean, we have organized a couple of stakeholder events already a couple of times before, since last year's and with this year already, but this is the first time that we can share to you the draft, and we are happy and looking forward to hear your views on this particular text. That is for the delegated act, and a couple of words also for the limits value. So not only the calculation, but the member states are required to also publish a national roadmaps detailing how they're going to introduce the limits value. This is more discussed in the Article 7.5. As I told you, they have to publish the roadmap by 2027, set target for new buildings from 2030. One thing that we want to emphasize on this, particular provisions, is the progressive downward trends. That is the main things that is pointed out in this Article 7.5. While at the same time, the member state, the directive, recognize the fact that it's maybe needed to accommodate or have some exceptions or rule for different climatic zones or building typologies. At the same time, the Article 7.5 also require the Commission to issue a guidance to help the member state, especially those who are not familiar with these topics, on how to go with this. And that's what we have put out in the guidance that I earlier mentioned, been published on the 30th of June. And you can find the draft. You can find this guidance in the link, and I suppose the slide can be shared after this event, and you can find it there as well. So a couple of things that I can point it out or highlight to you is, of course, the obligations that the limits value has to be in place from 2030 according to the Article 7.5. The facts that is well, in the Article 7.5 itself, what we read from the Commission side, at least, it is what we want to see in this the roadmap from the member state is a series of limits value from 2030 with a downward trends, and a very simplified example is, of course, a limits value or corresponding level ambitions in 2030, followed by a lower limits value by 2030 or by 2036. However, the member states want to decide on the interval. For example, instead of, well, the first one, it has to be 2030, of course, but the second one can be 2030 or 2035, depending on the member states' level of ambition, I might say. the closer, the shorter the intervals, the more administrative burdens it can impose on them, while at the same time more accommodation to the markets and the evolutions of the market, I may say. The member states are, of course, free to adapt the limits value for different climatic zone and building typology in accordance to the studies. And one thing that we want to highlight, that we have highlighted in this guidance is, of course, we ask the member states to consider also the readiness of the markets while at the same time, of course, encouraging the decarbonizations of the construction sector. But the readiness of the market is also important to be taken into account. And of course, we didn't forget to remind the member states that whatever the level of limits value that they're going to introduce, of course, have to be consulted and discussed with the relevant member states, relevant stakeholders. Sorry. And that's it from my side, and I'm happy to take any questions for now or at the end of the events.
We will wait with the questions until the end, and then we will give the word to Helle. So please write your questions in the chat. We will also do our best to answer them. I will also post a link for you, of course, in the chat immediately. But Helle, you are welcome to take over.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation. I've been looking forward to this webinar, and thank you very much, Bunthan, for sharing this very fresh news. It's very interesting. We have talked a lot about it for many years, and it's a lot of lessons learned into the proposals you are putting forward as a commission. I work in Nordic sustainable construction. I also work in the Danish Authority of Social Services and Housing. And this is a Nordic collaboration where we try to use each other's knowledge and build upon them to accelerate our opportunity for a greener, more digital and circular transition in the built environment. I want to share some of the relevant lessons on this topic with you today. But first, just a little bit of history so you know why we are put in place and what we are overall working towards. So the Nordic prime ministers and some of the largest CEOs came together in 2019, a few days ago now, to have this common vision for the Nordic countries to be, or the Nordic region, to be the most sustainable and integrated region in the world within 5 years. And I think all of us here know that for that to be possible to do and get towards, we really need to look into how we use our built environment and how we construct. So the history line, as it goes, is this one. So there was a declaration done by the Nordic ministers responsible for construction and housing in 2019, elaborating on issues on how we could accelerate our circular principles and low carbon principles in the construction. And to be able to do that, they initiated this program, Nordic Sustainable Construction, that started in 2021. And we worked together on several elements that I will dig into within a bit. Then they recommitted to this declaration in 2023. I will show you a bit of it in a little while. And then we gathered input to what to do after 2024. And I will share that in the end of this presentation. So this is a declaration from 2023. You can see it all online, but I just want to highlight some of these issues, especially the second phrase, harmonizing relevant regulation, method, data, tools, and policies for carbon neutrality in the built environment. These are some of the elements we'll be talking about today, that we have a rich understanding of each other's methods and that we use each other's knowledge to do it as aligned as possible. The proposal from the EU Commission is, of course, a very important tool for us to lean towards each other's methods. I also want to highlight the last part, preserving and developing existing building stock. They recognize the potential in that, and this is something that we are currently looking very much into It's not a key focus of today, but I wanted to highlight it. So the aim of this Nordic Sustainable Collaboration is really to support the Nordic vision and making the Nordics as a leading region in sustainable and competitive construction and housing with a minimized environmental and climate impact. So we look both at the climate part, but also the large environmental impact that construction impacts. The way we did it in 2021 to 2024, that several stakeholders from across the Nordics, across the whole value chain, contributed to this work. And we had 5 work packages. The one I will dig into today and share some of the knowledge from is work package 1 that was led by the Ministry of Environment from Finland. And that was really working towards finding common grounds on how to make these LCA life cycle assessment calculations that Bunthan now has this open proposal for, or draft act for. This is a wild slide, I know, but I know that the slides will be shared and maybe you have different interests across the sector, those who are participating from around, I think mainly Europe. And here you can actually click on the link. So if some of it is relevant for you, you can click on it. I will mainly dig into some of the results from what's highlighted with the yellow in this slide. So the one focusing on how to do a LCA calculation. Yeah, this is a bit more of what we actually developed. There's a lot of, it was a lot of effort put into it. So there's a lot of knowledge, I could say, hidden away, or that you can dig up in these links. One of the things we did was to try to make an overview of ever dynamic scene. So who has made regulation on what, at what time, and to what depth around the Nordic countries. So Sweden were the first to say you have to calculate. When you build new, you need to know what your emissions are. Then came Norway. Also putting into regulation, you need to calculate, and that was in 2022. Then January 2023, Denmark said the same, you need to calculate, but there's also a limit to how much you can emit per square meter for your new buildings. And we have then tightened that in 2025, and you can see that the next tightening will be in 2027 and again in 2029. Finland have just sent their proposal for limit values into notification in the EU. So they will enter with limit values from January. And Iceland have put it into regulation that you need to calculate. And they made a really interesting, I think, digital framework for that, digital setup. And they are considering integrating limit values within a few years. And you see in the very bottom line, this is the EU Commission and Bunthan's work, like what will be in the Energy Performance of Building Directive, where he already mentioned all of that, and that is now out for public hearing, which I find very interesting. So this is an overview of how the different countries are moving ahead on some of these topics. It's also being discussed a lot in Norway, and we expect news in the coming, I don't know, months from there. But there's a lot of things. So you are talking about how to calculate. Isn't it just a calculation? But actually, this was just the nice overview that maybe looked a bit possible to understand. Is like the overall details. When do you have to calculate? But there's a lot of things to consider when you, as a regulator and also as an industry, have to live up to this regulation. So what buildings are included? I think Bunthan's draft act will put some clearance on that, but there's always a lot of details within this. And of course, it matters a lot if all buildings are included or not, and to what size, and what about extensions, and all of these considerations. It's an important one. What area? We have different definitions of floor area. Do you count for the outer part of the wall or the inner part? And this is also different. And then especially, what is your building classification model, and how much of it do you include? Are kitchen fixed, or are they taken aside, screws? And there's many details that are important for you as a regulator to to set rules on so that the industry know how to do it. And also what scope, what part of the LCA calculation do you include? Here again, Bunthan and the EU Commission is hopefully putting some clarity on that, but we have had different experiences and each country have had different reasons of why integrating the ones they have done. And when do you have to declare? Of course, in the beginning especially, it takes some hours, both for the industry, but also for the authorities to take all this data together and to inform them, maybe to the municipality or to the authority. It differs across the countries where you have to give this information, and how often should it be in the design phase where you can really change the way that you build, or should it be in the final clearance when the building is built? And then how to report the LCA. Is there a structured data template that makes it easier, at least for the authorities or the municipalities to use this knowledge? And then there's energy scenarios. When do you update your emission data and many other things? So just to say, there's a lot of things you can consider. And in this report that you see on the nice picture, decarbonization of a building stock, you can find some of the comparisons amongst the countries and some of the lessons learned. And what to remember to consider when you, as an authority or industry, want to calculate. So here are some of the things that we concluded. These are good considerations when you make this regulation. Of course, you need competences. The sector needs to know how to do that. We have done it in different ways across the countries, but here on the right side of my screen, you see some of the examples, some of the, of course, the labeling schemes have often fostered a lot of experience already and keep doing that. But there's also reports and national authorities that have set aside funds to make this knowledge informations, but the industry have often also contributed with their workshops and other input to give this training to the industry. Then secure stakeholder involvement to make sure that the rule works out in the field. It's really good to have input from the industry so that they can give their contributions of how ready is the different parts of the value chain to contribute. And we have seen what's showed on the graph or the figure on the side is initiatives across all the Nordic countries where they in different ways have involved the industry and use their input, because that's very valuable for it to have a good implementation. Then you need access to generic data, and you also need standard values. You wouldn't be able to have all this information from the very beginning, so you need to have that set up to be able to make the calculations. Sometimes you can borrow from some other countries, sometimes you need to make your own, and it often depends from different country what the generic data could be. Yeah. Then there's always this consideration of a database. So in Sweden and Finland, they made their own database, and there are surely benefits of doing that. But of course, you also need to find the funding for it, and I think that can be done in many ways. Yeah, here you see some of those databases. And then you need to improve your availability and utilization of EPDs. I think this is a field that's moving rather fast, but it's also very important when your limit value is going down, you need more and more product-specific data to be able to reach that limit. So it's an important tool to start thinking of and motivate the sector. And then you need to find out how to put that limit. What is practice in your country, your region? And that can be done by gathering case examples. And sometimes you end up finding out that it's easy to get shiny case examples like pilot projects, but maybe they're not so representative. So we in Denmark have used a lot of efforts on that, but you can also make a more artificial a figure that you can then work on and use along the way. That's also an option, the archetype. you can read more about how to do that in some of the reports we've done. And here you see examples of some of those that are done across Europe and the Nordics and within EU. You need to find your scope and your initial method and to share it. We always try to align with the EPBD as much as we knew. And we will, with great interest, look into the draft act. Then the industry always give this feedback that it's really important for them to have a long vision. What are we aiming towards? When do I need to invest these things? And what is of interest for me as an industry stakeholder? So if it's possible for you to do the roadmap that Bunthan presented as specific as possible, I think it will be a benefit for your industry in the country. Here you see some of the ones we did, both in Denmark and Sweden some time ago. This one I think is not totally updated, but that was at one time a plan. They, of course, always adapt to the current circumstances, but at least a plan is better than none. And then the last one jumps a bit, but it's important to remember all of this regulation is very focused on new build. But as I said in the introduction, it's also really important to look at how can we optimize the use of the buildings we already have and how to minimize demolition. So we have a new collaboration. So the Nordic Sustainable Construction is still ongoing, and we have new work packages, 3. One is run by the Housing and Construction Authority of Iceland, and they run the one on climate, and that's the one I will tell you about today, where we will try to build on all the experience we had from the first phase. But what we see now is we want to see how can we help both for the industry to make the LCA calculations faster and easier, and also as an active tool in lowering the carbon and the resource footprint from constructing. But also for us as authorities, how can we find an efficient way to use this or gather this information and follow up and make sure that the regulation is followed well and implemented. There are still some remaining opportunities in the work, and we don't know exactly how and what we'll be looking into, but we're looking into some of these, we call them opportunities. So how to make it easier and less time consuming to make and update LCAs from design phase to final clearance. In the last phase, we looked a lot at you lose data when you take the BIM model from one phase to the next and to the next, and also across the collaboration, the value chain. There's some collaboration issues that need to be looked into to make sure you have a good LCA calculation. I'm sure this can also be helped with from some of the digital tools that we will hopefully hear from Jacob in a bit. Where to find generic data and what links should there be between these databases. So sometimes a country do not update their generic data as fast as a database would do. So should it be possible to have the most, what do you call it? The most comparable product or data and use that instead of what's in the national generic data. Then what benefits are there in these building information data from LCA, and how detailed should they be reported to the authorities? A lot of data take more effort. Is it that effort worth? Is it worth that effort? And what values can we get from these data, and how should they be stored and kept and used? And yeah, there's a lot of opportunities within that. But also investments that are needed, and who should then pay that. So yeah, how and where should the data be stored? There's a lot of unanswered questions there, but I think there's a lot of fruits that are still possible for us to harvest. So on the 28th of October, we have this yearly Nordic Climate Forum for Construction, we call it, where we gather all the Nordic authorities working within this field. We have also invited Bunthan and his other colleague Josefina, and here we will have information both where is the regulation in the Nordic countries on LCA, what are they doing to accelerate the efficiency of these LCAs, but also what are they doing to improve the utilization of the existing building stock. So it's online, and it starts a bit before 9, and you are welcome to sign up. There's a link here in the slides. We have a lot of knowledge, you can dig into it, and then that was it from me. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Also, Helle and Bunthan, of course. I will definitely be there on the 28th. It's very interesting. And I think if Jakob from Dorte Mandrup Architects can share his screen, then we will dive into a bit of the practical part of this webinar, how to assess all these inputs that we saw. I think it's very interesting to hear both Bunthan and Helle talking about future legislation and of course some of the things that we will also try to speak a bit about. Jakob and I now is of course at the moment we cannot compare an whole building LCA calculation across the European countries. We will give you some examples of that in a bit, but we will just dive into a brief introduction about the LCA, then we go to embodied versus operational carbon, and take you through some steps of how to make these building LCAs in real-time LCA. And Jakob, if we can, yeah, there we are. So who are we? My name is Mads Ditlevsen. I'm head of sustainability at Real-Time LCA. I do have a background, as you see here, NTI. That is why the reason for that is we are part of the NTI group. Our mission is, as it says here, definitely to empower professionals across the built environment to understand, reduce, and document the climate impact. So that is very shortly about me, and I look very much forward to share some insights with you. Jakob, please take the floor.
Yes, my name is Jakob, and I'm a construction architect at the architectural office Dorte Mandrup, and we're located in Copenhagen. I'm working with LCA and sustainability besides BIM and detailed design. I'm part of our support group within these areas because we don't have a department of those, but try to educate broadly in the office so we have the competences within these areas present and on all projects at all time. I will continue about to tell you a little bit about what is an LCA, and it's actually quite simple when you look at it like this. It's embodied carbon, which is emissions from production, transportation, construction. Then that's when you add that together with the operational, that is the use stage, and that's the stage that kicks in after the construction is completed. So it's carbon cost from, for instance, ventilations and stuff like that. And how to optimize the embodied carbon is to use material with lower emissions, better EPDs, and actually reducing the amount of materials. That's the easiest way. And the operational carbon can be reduced by using natural ventilation, hybrid cooling system, implementing thermal mass and stuff like that. But in general, transformation of existing buildings is always the best because we have an issue now. So therefore, we at Dorte Mandrup very often focus a lot on the upfront embodied carbon because we need to reduce now and not in 50 or 60 years. So emissions we make today is what makes the change for the future. More detailed, we have a production stage where that is the upfront carbon emissions. And I will try to explain these phases or modules with an example like a brick. In the production phase, you dig out the clay from this earth, transport it to the production facilities, and then it is processed and burned, maybe sun-dried if it's a more sustainable brick. And then it will be transported to the construction site in the construction phases, where you also have some waste and transportation of that. And then we jump over the use stage. And then we have the end of life stage. And that is when the building ends its life. and is demolished. And at least in theory, when we talk about LCA, it's after 50 years. And hopefully the waste is processed and sorted so it can go into a reuse or upcycle stage and enter a new building with a lower emission. The lifespan in Denmark is 50 years, and it's very often up to discussion that buildings is always standing more than 50 years, but in average, office building is demolished after 40 years, and the construction and industry logistics centers and stuff like that is maybe down to 30 years. So for some buildings, you are actually lucky. You need to have to calculate it for 50 years. The D stage is potential stage, but it's not included in calculations as such. The U stage, the operational carbon, is all the emissions that comes during the lifetime, the use of the building, and most of the emission comes in the B6 and B7 stages. That is the operational energy from ventilation, cooling, and all these things. So that's where you should focus. I will introduce this project of Dorte Mandrup, which Mads was used as a case study. It's Center for Health that we started the design of in 2019 as a pilot project from the municipalities of Copenhagen. It's not a long time ago, but the experience with timber construction have developed a lot since then. And one of the biggest concerns from the client was actually it was possible to find companies with experience of timber construction of that size. It finished last year, and where we handed over to the client, and we are very happy about the architecture, and also it has been a big success for the people that use the building, which is people struggling with life disease related issues. Some of the metadata Mads needs for his LCA is the area, and this is a plan drawing from the building. There is around 2,500 square meters above ground, 900 square meters below in a basement containing a gym hall, technical rooms, and then there is some overhangs. So the overall building is 3,500 square meters. And that is the reference number area that Mads needs for his calculations. The superstructure is mainly timber, like most of the interior surfaces you saw before. And then we have an aluminium facade with glass and integrated solar panels. And now, Mads.
Yeah, so just to take you into how we do it in real-time LCA. So here we are in real-time LCA, browser-based, and we have two tabs, so to say, projects and the library. Library, you find all the EPDs that Helle was talking about, also generic data from each country and specific EPDs. I will come back to that in a bit. But of course, to make a project, we will need to enter an address in real-time LCA. And what that is doing is actually to define which country are you in. So now it's a Danish address, Danish regulation, Swedish address, Swedish regulation, with some links, which stages are included. We will do the same for Norway, for example. And we can see it's changing accordingly which stages are involved. But in this case, I just wanted to see what happens if we put this beautiful Dorte Mandrup project into an Irish context, for example. And to do that, we will need some project details. As Jakob also just mentioned, the Center for Health. And here in all this metadata, we can give it a project number, building type. This is not very important in Ireland, but in a Danish context, this becomes very important because they're actually differentiated limit values as both Helle and Bunthan also talked about. We are in the operation stage of this Center for Health, and we can also enter how many persons or users the building has. This is mainly in a DGNB context that these numbers are interesting. Dorte Mandrup put in as the builder, and of course it's a Copenhagen municipality building. might be a bit strange that they are building in Ireland, but anyways, it's just a sample. We took year of construction and commissioning to this year, 2025, just for the example. And here this becomes quite interesting because, as also Helle talked about, there are different ways of calculating these floor areas. Some do it by the BTAs. In Denmark, we have something called reference area, where you take other buildings into consideration also, and then they count for a certain percentage of the whole building. I will not dive too deep into that, but just to say that it is very different from country to country how you actually calculate just the area. We are in Ireland, so we have some different calculation methods we can choose from, levels or the IGBC, Irish Green Building Council. But I will choose the custom, just in this case, to show you we can calculate different consideration periods, 60, 50 years, 100 years, if that's what we want to. And we always want our customers to work with these threshold values or limit values. We will put it into a Danish context, since it's what we call other building. The threshold limit in Denmark is actually 8 kilos CO2 equivalent per square meter per year. And here we can also define, since it is a custom calculation type, we can define exactly which stages, modules do we want to look at. And you can see it also changes a bit if we check on and off different stages. Now we have the A4 stage, where you can choose transport types. Again, Irish context, Irish transport types. If we're in a different country, you will not be able to choose the Irish transport types. The same goes actually for the whole installation stage. So here we are in Ireland, and you can only choose some certain emission factors there. And the same goes for the whole operational. Just to proceed, I don't want to look at A4, A5, B6 anymore, and then those tabs will not be showing. This is just to tell you that it is in some places very custom calculations, but we are really encouraging everyone to look into the new rules from both the Nordic countries and the EU, what Bunthan was talking about also. This is a bit different maybe from other softwares. We do this live integration with BIM tools, and since experts are drawing in different models, architectural structure models, we are able to send data directly from those models. We can also send everything directly from the BIM tool into one model and just call it everything. But now in this case, we actually have a structural model and we have an architecture model. So I will choose that one also. So if we just go a bit further, one more, Jakob. Can we go one further? Yeah. There we go. So this is the Center for Health, as Jakob was talking about. And we can see on the left-hand side, we have the building in Revit. So that's the BIM tool we chose now, but it could also be different tools. And what we do is we make the direct link. What you normally do, you will get something called a schedule or a bill of quantity from any other tool where you can get out all these quantities and put it into a building LCA software. We have done it live with the 3D models and then uploaded it directly into real-time LCA. And if we just continue one more, we have now the view of what we call material mapping in real-time LCA. So we have the building on the left-hand side, where you can see all the materials that came directly from the BIM software. This could also be imported manually or by an Excel template. And then we can start to look into the specific materials of this building. So now we have wood, CLT, cross-laminated timber, and it consists of, or it is implemented in different building types or components. And on the right-hand side, as I show you now, we have the library. So here we have this generic database from Sweden. I put this now into a Swedish context, actually. So if you see in the top, it says EU project SE, Sweden. But still here we are able to have a lot of different data sources, EPD Norway, EPD International, and so on. But in this case, I would just like to search for CLT. I found some cross-laminated timber here. It's from the Boverket database, and we can see all the data from taken directly from the source. And how then to do this, Helle was talking about it also, to going from design stage to maybe a more as-built LCA calculation. We simply drag and drop a material and make it more and more detailed. As we find EPDs also, for example, we can still drag and drop and then update the model as we go along. The same goes actually for the BIM model. If the BIM model is changing, we can also just do a integration again, press send data in our BIM tool, and then we can do this direct transformation into the new building. And if you will just take one more step ahead, Jakob. We now have the, and you can start the video. Yeah, so now we have the building. It is not completed yet, but we at least have some data on it. And this is very interesting because we saw also that different countries, even the European Union, as I understood it now, will maybe look into what we call CO2 equivalents per square meter and not per square meter per year as we have in Denmark, to be more streamlined on how we actually perform these documentations. So here we see it in a Swedish context where they already have this per square meter, and I'm able to use my BIM model or real-time LCA actually to see the hotspots of my building. So what is emitting the most in this building, which is a very interesting thing to go about when you do this variance studies on your building and actually try to see where are our emissions and where do we have to maybe do some different variants on this specific project. And if we go to the next one. Yeah, then now we did the calculations. So I did it in 3 different contexts or 3 different countries. So we do in Danish context, in a German, and in a Swedish context actually. And as you can see, there are quite a big difference in the results. One thing is I use generic data for everything. Danish generic data, I use the Boverket data, and I use generic data from Övergår in Germany. But still, we have quite a lot of differences. One thing is, of course, the unit, square meter per year or square meter. We have in Sweden, they do not include, as they call it, biogenic carbon in the A1 to A3, whereas we do that in Denmark or in Germany. And we also see that in Denmark, we have this separate threshold value for what we call A4 and A5 stage. So that's the 1.2 you see in the top picture. So there are a lot of differences in result, but also, as we have talked about already in this webinar, in the building components included. If I want to look at this, Jakob was talking about it, what they do a lot in Dorte Mandrup, look at the upfront carbon. This is actually what we see now. So here also you see a big difference in the upfront carbon. But this is something that we really would like to, of course, encourage people to have in mind. The upfront carbon is what we are emitting now. And if we really want to change the world and the climate, this is what we have to look at. So just to show you a bit of a different context in what we actually are looking at and how to go about results in real-time LCA. And just to be fair to Dorte Mandrup also, I did the calculation with only generic data. Now we are in the project that Dorte Mandrup calculated for Center of Health, and this is the result as it looked some years ago when it was built. So they are safe for the limit values, just to be fair to them. Yes.
Actually, there was no limit values when we did this build. But it's nice to see that it was actually below. We also have some recommendations, and one of the recommendations that we have here at Dorte Mandrup is actually to start the LCA studies from the very beginning, because when we are designing a building, doing competitions, regardless if it's architects or engineers or other trades, we are deciding for most of the CO2 in the very early design stages. For instance, we decide on the structure, how the facade looks, and they are hard to optimize and change later. So we're actually deciding most of the LCA, maybe up to 90% already in the very early design stages. And over time, it's the possibility of optimization, the LCA result decreases. And in the very end, it's almost only possible to optimize it a little bit by going from generic data to product-specific EPDs. I have borrowed this diagram from the later report, which is showing the average for building parts and how much they account for CO2-wise. As you can see, if you take the facade, superstructure, and substructure, that accounts for 81% of the embodied carbon when it comes to an office building. Strongest focus is to of course to reduce the upfront carbon, and it's also really a big recommendation to look at least at the heavy components in kilo or tons, because they very often also the ones that account for most CO2. And I have a great example of that, a study I did for a competition where it's a part of the superstructure of a building where we took out a part of that, and I would guess this example will account for 65 to 70% of the total CO2 in an LCA context of this project. And the module you see here is a superstructure to the left made from concrete, and in the middle we have a structure with the load-bearing CLT walls and some beams and columns, and to the very far right, it's a timber structure with the load-bearing beams and decks, but with no load-bearing walls, so a beam column system. And the concrete structure is 200% higher in the CO2 emission compared to the load-bearing beam and column system. And you can also see in the middle, it's following complete the recommendation when it's the heaviest construction is also the one with the heaviest CO2. And to make a fair comparison, it's very important to us at Dorte Mandrup. I have added layers to the different structures, so we have almost the same fire-resistant acoustic abilities to make it fair. And we very often see people forgot that they just do a timber construction and forget all about, for instance, fire. But this is also accounted for on this one. Otherwise, the difference have been even higher. And to sum it up, start the LCAs in the very early stages. In Denmark, the law is when the building is finished, then you need to document the LCA. But what do you do when the building is already standing and you might not be within the limits? So therefore, you need to have that as part of the decision-making process throughout all stages. Model consistency is more relevant for the work itself. It's easier if you have great BIM models to make these calculations very fast and efficient. At Dorte Mandrup, we do it in Rhino and Revit, and then it's possible to do a lot of auto mapping. And focus on the heavy components, like I just said. Solar panels is not always a good idea, especially not in the Nordic countries. This is a live screenshot from the energy mixes in Europe yesterday. But if you are in countries like Poland, where they have more coal in the energy mix, it might be a really good idea. But in the Nordic countries, and especially in Norway, the CO2 emissions from the LCA panel production might not even pay themselves off during their lifetime. So please keep that in mind. LCA does not equally sustainability, because there are some sustainability things you can do that is not part of the LCA documentation. For instance, it's hard to include design for disassembly, different ways to upcycle and reuse materials directly in the LCAs. But I hope that will be part of the future LCA methodologies. And just to wrap it up, it's hard to compare results, but try anyway. We do that at Dorte Mandrup, even though we are working all over the world. Yes, that was it from us. Do you have anything to add, Mads?
It was great, Jakob. Thank you very much for your presentation also. And that pretty much sums up the whole webinar of today. We will, of course, have some questions. There are some in the chat already. We also did answer some written, as you might see, but we will start with one to you, Bunthan. So will the DA require reporting of fossil emissions separately from bio-based and land use change? And should limits refer to fossil only? So that's pretty much two questions in one.
Yes, thank you, Mads. I saw the question, but I want to try to take the chance to like speaking directly rather than put into writing, because it's a bit long of answer, I might say. The answer is yes and no. Yes, in the sense that no, in the sense that we have to look at the legal basis of this delegated act. So delegated act is coming from where? It's coming from the Article 7.3 of the directive. And what is the purpose of the Article 7.3 of the directive is to respond to Article 7.2, which is the requirement to do the calculation and put the result in the EPC. And as some of you may even more expert than me on the EPC itself, we have already a lot of information in EPC. The directive EPBD required that the result of the life cycle assessment has to be there, like in the front page when it is available. So we cannot ask the member state or the practitioner to put too much information on that. Otherwise, you can flood all the information in the EPC, because other information related to, for example, energy use or the bidding is also important, and we cannot put everything in there. And for that particular reasons, we have to limit a number of information that is related to the life cycle assessment in EPC. Which is the legal basis of what we can or we cannot do in this delegated act. And that is one reason. And the second reason is that the delegated act is talking about the total calculation of the EPC. And for these reasons of limits information, I might say, in the EPC itself, we're going to require that only the total life cycle assessments of the GWP is reported. When we say total, we mean the total in the sense that it's the total of the sum of fossil, bio-based, and LULUF reported for each life cycle stage, as you can see in the draft right now. With that being said, we don't stop the member states to do more than it is required in the directive if they are willing to. Of course, in the guidance that is already published in on the 30th June, we kind of recommend the member state to consider collecting more information on the life cycle assessment, more than those that we have set it in this delegated act. So any information separately for each indicator, sub-indicator of the GWP, I might say, LULUF, biogenic, and fossil, and of course the member state are free to collect those kind of information. Related to the questions on the limits value, one thing that I want to highlight here is the limits. The delegated act itself is, again, part of the requirement from the Article 7.3, and related to the Article 7.2 is purely on the calculation side and not on the limits value. So one thing that I can tell you is that you're not going to find, please don't expect to find anything related to the limits value in the delegated act, because the legal basis for this delegated act is not for the limits value by itself. With that being said, of course, when we're talking about the limits value, is rather on the clause 1.5, and we give some recommendations on this in the guidance adopted on the 30th of June.
Thank you very much, Bunthan. And we got also a question, and I would actually like to both ask Helle and Bunthan. So limit values for existing buildings, so transformation, renovations, is that something we are looking into in the Nordic sustainable construction? Helle?
Yes, I guess it's a kind of a natural question. What we're looking into is so across the different countries, the Nordic countries, and also initiators and organizations and cities, they are developing their own methodology of how to calculate. And like you put in your question, light, medium, deep, because each renovation is so unique. So what we're looking into is to try to map what methodologies are there, to what extent that we want to make regulation on it. And regulation is it makes it more difficult. At least it demands time. And what we're looking into at the moment is more, how can we make using the buildings we have the easy choice? So we are rather taking away unclarities in regulation, or looking into each country decide for themselves and their political environment, but we look into what options are there for that. But we want to talk and have a common discussion on what methodologies are there, and maybe we can make a common methodology instead of everyone creating their own. Normally, it will rely a lot on the existing building regulation, which makes it difficult just to make one. So I'm not dreaming about one, but I'm dreaming of us, stepping on each other's shoulders and finding the best methodology. So if you who wrote that question know about good methodologies, please, write them to our email, which you find on the website. That would be much appreciated.
And then Bunthan, maybe also the same for you, if you're looking into renovation or transformation.
Yeah, I perfectly share the view from Helle. I mean, of course, there is questions of methodology, and there's also a good reflection. I mean, before we're talking about the LCA of renovation, even more important, I might say, is to use as much as possible the existing one already. That is also the important issue. On the EU level, and according to the EPBD, we don't have a legal basis, according to my knowledge, of putting any limits value on the renovation operations of the renovations of the building, I might say. The only thing related to the existing buildings and LCA I can find in the directive is a requirement to disclose the LCA results of existing building, but only for a very, very high performance, energy performance buildings. So we're talking about A+ class buildings. And the reason I might say that we don't have a really hard provisions on renovation, it's not because that we don't think it is important. We know that it is not a negligible part of the emissions from the renovations. It's just that we have to start from somewhere, and only talking about the new building itself. I mean, for some country, especially for the Nordic country, to have on this regulation for many years already, it's still some effort already for them. But it may be or may be possible for existing building, but it's still some effort. But all the other countries, we have to also to understand that it's at the EU level, it's probably not feasible yet for them to jump up directly to the renovation buildings. And I think that is the logic that we have in this directive, starting from somewhere and starting from the new buildings as we have right now. And let's see together in the future what we can do.
Thank you. And just very quick in the end here, you mentioned it shortly, Jakob. You try to compare projects throughout Europe. Just in 1 minute, how do you actually do that?
Try to manipulate the data a little bit, take out things, maybe add some reference numbers to fill out the gaps. But it's actually pretty easy to compare upfront carbon. That's the easiest one to compare across. But otherwise, we try to adjust for the considering period, reference area and stuff like that. So you have like an idea, but we only use it internally, I will say, because it is really hard.
Thank you. And with that, we also reach 11:15 here in Copenhagen time. So thank you all very much for joining. It was a pleasure, Bunthan, Helle, to hear your insights, both from EU and Nordic. And Jakob, of course, thank you very much from Dorte Mandrup for joining us for this webinar. And have a great day out there. Keep on working on the nice legislation, and of course all the building LCA experts and architects and so on. Please reach out if you have any questions afterwards also. Thank you very much.